Salem, a tranquil small town in the heart of the United States, was exactly as Steve Miller remembered it. The tree-lined streets, the red brick houses, and the local shops exuded a nostalgic aura that transported him back to his childhood. Crossing the stone bridge leading into town, he felt a knot in his stomach, a mix of anxiety and hope. It had been 7 years since he had left Salem, and now he was returning as a different man, a successful businessman, but with fragile health and a soul burdened with regrets. Steve parked his car in front of his mother's old house. The house, though a bit weathered by time, still retained the cozy charm he remembered. Before stepping out of the car, he took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for what lay ahead. His mother, Sarah, was ill, and he knew his visit was awaited with mixed feelings, both of love and of hurt from his abandonment. As he walked towards the entrance, his eyes caught an unexpected scene. At the gate of the house, a young woman, dressed in worn-out clothes, sat on the ground, holding a boy in her arms. The boy looked to be about 6 years old, and his big sad eyes met Steve's. There was something about them that deeply touched him, something he couldn't immediately identify. The woman hastily got up upon seeing Steve approaching. "Sorry, sir, we have nowhere to go," she said, her voice heavy with despair. Steve stopped, surprised and moved. He wasn't prepared for this encounter. The woman, who introduced herself as Emily, explained that she and her son, Lucas, were homeless and in need of help. Steve felt an urge to help, perhaps a way to redeem his own past sins. "You can come in," he said, gesturing for her and the boy to follow him. As he opened the door to the house, he felt a wave of emotions: guilt from the past and hope of doing something good in the present. His mother's house, which once was a home filled with life and laughter, now seemed like a silent sanctuary waiting to be filled again. As Steve helped Emily and Lucas settle in, he couldn't help but let memories of his own past flood his mind. After ensuring they were comfortable, Steve went upstairs to his old room, feeling the weight of the memories the house held. Upon opening the door, he found everything exactly as he had left it: the wooden bed, the study desk with years of use marks, and the photos of his youth hanging on the wall. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he was transported back 7 years ago, when he left Salem with hopes of building a better life. Back then, he was an ambitious young man, freshly graduated in civil engineering, and determined to make a name for himself in the business world. His father had passed away when he was 16, leaving Sarah, his mother, to support the family alone. She did everything she could to support him, working long hours and sacrificing her own dreams so that Steve could pursue his. Steve remembered his departure to New York, full of promises and dreams. There, he quickly rose in the construction industry. It was during this time that he met Amanda, an ambitious and charming woman who seemed to share his aspirations. They married swiftly, forming a powerful couple in the business world. However, as time went on, Steve began to realize that their marriage was more based on convenience than true love. Amanda was more interested in status and the benefits their marriage provided than in Steve as a person. While his career flourished, his relationship with Sarah deteriorated. Steve rarely returned to Salem, and his visits became increasingly sporadic. Sarah would often call, asking him to visit, but Steve always found an excuse, caught up in his work and personal issues. When Sarah fell ill, Steve was so absorbed in his own life that he didn't realize the seriousness of the situation. He buried himself in work, trying to forget the guilt that consumed him. Recently, his life in New York crumbled. The discovery of Amanda's affair with his business partner, Paul, was the final blow. Steve felt betrayed and devastated, and his health began to deteriorate rapidly. Heavy investments in expensive medical treatments showed no significant results, further exacerbating his crisis. Sitting there in his old room, Steve realized he needed to face his demons and seek redemption. He knew he owed his mother an apology and that he needed to rebuild his life, starting with his family. With this renewed determination, Steve descended the stairs to find his mother. Sarah was in the living room, her frail figure bent as she gazed out the window. When she turned to see him, her eyes were filled with conflicting emotions: love, pain, and a hint of hope. "Mom," Steve said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm so sorry for everything. For leaving you alone." Sarah sighed, tears welling in her eyes. "You followed your path, Steve, but I always hoped you'd come back." Steve sat beside his mother, the pain of separation visible in his eyes. Sarah, her figure now frail, looked at him with a mixture of love, pain, and a flicker of hope. "Mom," Steve began, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm so sorry for everything. For leaving you alone." Sarah sighed, tears welling in her eyes. "You followed your path, Steve. But I always hoped you'd come back." The room seemed to carry the weight of 7 years of unspoken hurts. Steve took his mother's hand, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath the thin skin. "I was a fool, Mom. I let success consume me. I wanted so badly to do something big, to prove that I could. But all I managed to do was push away the people who mattered most." Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of understanding and sadness. "You were young, ambitious. I understood that, but what hurt was the silence. The lack of news. I worried about you every day, wondering if you were okay, if you needed anything. But you never called back." Tears streamed down Steve's face. "I was so focused on building something big that I forgot about the little things, the things that really matter. I miss birthdays, holidays, important moments with you. And now I'm here trying to fix everything, but knowing I can't reclaim the lost time." Sarah squeezed Steve's hand tighter, her own tears falling. "I forgive you, Steve. I always have. But we need to move forward. To cherish the time we have now." Steve nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I love you, Mom. And I promise I'll do everything I can to be here, to take care of you." Sarah smiled, a sad yet loving smile. "I love you too, my son. Let's rebuild everything together." The silence that followed was not one of discomfort, but of deep understanding and reconciliation. Steve knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he felt determined to make things right this time. And so, mother and son began to stitch the wounds opened by time and distance, with the promise to never let each other go again. Steve knew that after reconciling with his mother, he needed to address another open wound in his life, his marriage. Back in New York, he entered the apartment he had shared with Amanda, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and a painful emptiness. Amanda was sitting on the couch next to Paul. The sight of them together made Steve's blood boil, but he kept calm, determined to confront this situation head-on. "Amanda, we need to talk," said Steve, his voice firm but controlled. Amanda looked up with a mix of guilt and defiance. "Yes, we do," she replied, her voice tense. Steve took a deep breath. "I know about you and Paul. I know about the affair. And I'm not going to continue like this. I want a divorce." Amanda blinked, tears filling her eyes, but she maintained a defiant expression. "Steve, it wasn't easy for me either. You were always absent, obsessed with your work. I felt alone." Steve's anger began to simmer. "That doesn't justify the betrayal, Amanda. I know I messed up, I distanced myself, but instead of trying to fix things, you chose to betray me with my business partner." Paul, who had remained silent, tried to intervene. "Steve, we didn't want this to happen like this. It was a mistake." Steve turned to him, his voice cutting. "A mistake? You two destroyed our marriage, our trust. There's no fixing that." Amanda took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "I understand you're hurt, but you know that the apartment is mine legally. You can't just leave like this." Steve nodded, accepting yet another loss. "You can keep the apartment. I don't want anything from here anymore. I just want a fresh start, away from all of this." With that decision made, Steve turned and left the apartment, each step laden with pain and disappointment. He felt like a part of his life was crumbling, but he knew he had to move forward. The road would be tough, but he was determined to start anew. Back in Salem, Steve found solace in the presence of Emily and Lucas. His mother's house, which once seemed like a place of painful memories, now began to transform into a haven of hope. Steve began to help Emily and Lucas in practical ways, offering financial and emotional support, finding a new purpose in caring for others. Back in Salem, Steve began taking legal steps for the divorce. The process was complicated and emotionally draining. Feeling rejected and betrayed, Amanda did everything to make things difficult. She hired aggressive lawyers and contested every detail, turning the divorce into a bitter legal battle. Steve spent sleepless nights, divorce documents spread across the kitchen table. He felt the pain of the end of his marriage in every fiber of his being. Memories of the good times with Amanda mixed with the betrayal, creating a storm of emotions he could barely control. Every time he thought he was making progress, Amanda pulled him back into pain and frustration. One night, while waiting for an email from his lawyer, Steve heard knocks on the door. Opening it, he found Amanda outside, her eyes red from crying. "Steve, please, can we talk?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. He hesitated, knowing this conversation could reopen wounds he was desperately trying to heal. "Amanda, I'm not sure if this is a good idea. Please," she repeated, tears streaming down her face. I just want to understand what happened. We were happy. How did we get to this point?" Steve took a step back, allowing Amanda to come in. They sat in the living room, the tension almost palpable in the air. "Amanda, we lost each other," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "Our marriage became a business partnership, and we lost the emotional connection. When you cheated on me with Paul, that was the breaking point." Amanda sobbed, clutching her hands. "I know I messed up, Steve, but I still love you. Can we try again? Can we save our marriage?" Steve felt a weight in his chest. "Amanda, I loved you too, but what we had is gone. We hurt each other too much, and there's no going back." Their conversation was interrupted by Lucas, who entered the room, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Steve, are you okay?" the boy asked, noticing the tension. Amanda looked at Lucas, surprised. "Who is he?" Steve stood up, placing his hand on Lucas's shoulder. "This is Lucas. He and his mother, Emily, are staying here for a while." Amanda looked at Steve, a new understanding in her eyes. "You've moved on, haven't you?" she said, her voice filled with pain. "It's not that simple," Steve replied, feeling the weight of truth in his words. "But yes, I'm trying to rebuild my life." Amanda nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "So that's it. I guess I just needed to hear that from you." As Amanda left, Steve felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He knew this was a necessary step, but the pain of the divorce was a burden he still carried. The next day, Steve received an urgent call from his lawyer. "Steve, we have a problem. Amanda has filed a contestation and is demanding a significant portion of your assets, including the company." Steve's heart raced. "She can't do that. The company is mine. Legally, she has a basis to demand it, especially if she can prove that she contributed to the growth of the company." Steve felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. In addition to the painful divorce, he now faced the potential loss of his business, the one thing he had managed to build successfully. Steve gathered his legal team and began planning a defense. Tension mounted each day as Amanda and her lawyers attacked every weak point of his company. Emily noticed the stress in Steve and tried to offer support, but he was consumed by the legal battle. One night, while reviewing documents, Steve received another unexpected visit: Paul, his former partner. "Steve, we need to talk," said Paul, his expression serious. Steve looked at him, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I know Amanda is trying to destroy you, and I won't allow it. I want to help." Steve fell silent, assessing Paul's intentions. Could he trust him after everything that had happened? The tension in the air was almost unbearable. "Why do you want to help me now?" Steve asked, his gaze fixed on Paul. Paul sighed, looking genuinely remorseful. "I made a mistake, Amanda. She's not who I thought she was, and I realized I need to make this right. I want to help you save your company." Steve felt a mix of hope and distrust. "Are you willing to betray Amanda to help me?" Paul nodded. "Yes, I am, if it means doing the right thing." Steve knew accepting Paul's help would be risky, but he was running out of options. The fight for control of his company was escalating, and he needed all the help he could get. Steve sat at the kitchen table, documents spread around him. He felt exhausted both emotionally and physically. The legal battle with Amanda was draining all his energies. Paul had become an unexpected ally, but the situation was still incredibly tense and uncertain. Emily entered the kitchen, noticing Steve's worn-out expression. She approached quietly and placed a cup of hot tea beside him. "You need to rest a bit, Steve," she said gently. "This is tearing you apart." Steve looked up, grateful for the gesture, but the pain in his heart was evident. "I can't stop now, Emily. If I lose this company, I lose everything I've worked for." Emily pulled up a chair and sat beside him, placing her hand on his. "You're not alone, Steve. Lucas and I are here for you. And we need you well, not exhausted and sick." Her words touched Steve deeply. He allowed himself a moment to hold Emily's hand, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "I appreciate it, Emily. Truly. You've been my anchor." That same night, while Steve reviewed more documents, Lucas entered the room with a drawing in his hands. "Steve, I made this for you," he said, extending the paper. In the drawing were Steve, Emily, and Lucas, holding hands and smiling. The title above read, "Our Family." Steve felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the drawing. He bent down to Lucas's height and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Lucas. This means a lot to me." Lucas smiled, his eyes shining with joy. "You always help me with my homework and play with me. I wanted to make you happy too." The pain Steve felt from the battle with Amanda began to dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of love and gratitude. He realized that, despite all the difficulties, he was building something real and valuable with Emily and Lucas. Amidst this new family dynamic, Steve received an urgent call from Paul. "Steve, I have information that could turn the tide in your favor, but we need to act fast. Amanda is planning a move that could destroy the company for good." Steve felt his heart race. "What is she planning, Paul?" "She has gained access to some documents that could incriminate the company in a corruption scandal. I have evidence that these documents are forged, but we need to present them to the court immediately." Steve knew this could be the chance to save his company, but he also felt the weight of pressure on his shoulders. He shared the news with Emily, who looked at him with concern. "Steve, this is very risky. What if we can't prove that the documents are fake? You could lose everything." "I know," Steve replied, holding her hand, "but I have to try. This is the only chance I have." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Then we'll do this together. You're not alone in this." In the following days, Steve and Paul worked tirelessly to gather all the necessary evidence. Tension was at its peak, and with each step the risk seemed greater. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Steve entered the courtroom with Emily and Lucas by his side, feeling a mix of fear and hope. During the hearing, Amanda's lawyers presented the forged documents, alleging corruption in Steve's company. But Paul, with solid evidence, debunked the fraud, showing the court that the documents were fake. The room fell silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Finally, the judge looked at Steve. "Mr. Miller, the allegations against your company have been proven false. The court rules in your favor." Steve let out a sigh of relief, feeling a wave of emotion. He turned to Emily and Lucas, embracing them tightly. "We did it," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "We did it." Steve, Emily, and Lucas left the courthouse with a mix of relief and joy. The legal battle had been exhausting, but now a new hope shone in their eyes. They knew there were still challenges ahead, but for a moment, they allowed themselves to celebrate the victory. That evening, they decided to have a special dinner at home. Emily prepared a simple but delicious meal while Lucas helped set the table. Watching the scene unfold, Steve felt filled with a profound sense of gratitude and love. It was the first time in a long time that he felt like part of a real family. Sitting at the table, the three of them shared laughter and stories. Steve raised his glass, his gaze serious but affectionate. "I just want to thank you both," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You gave me the strength to keep fighting. I wouldn't have made it without your support." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "We're a team, Steve. We're in this together." With a wide smile on his face, Lucas raised his glass of juice. "To our family." They all toasted, and in that moment, Steve felt that despite all the difficulties, he was on the right path. The sense of belonging and love he felt was something he hadn't experienced in years. They laughed and shared stories, and the house, which had once seemed so empty and sad, was now filled with life and laughter. After dinner, Steve and Emily went out to the balcony while Lucas played in the backyard. Under the starry sky, they sat in silence, soaking in the peace of the moment. Steve held Emily's hand, feeling the softness and strength it conveyed. "Emily, you and Lucas have changed my life in a way I never thought possible," said Steve, his voice low but sincere. "I was so lost, so consumed by pain and guilt, but you've given me a reason to keep going, a new hope." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with love. "Steve, we found in you something we thought we'd lost too. A family, a home. I never imagined I'd find someone like you. Someone willing to accept us and love us." They drew closer, their faces illuminated by the gentle moonlight. The kiss they shared was tender and full of meaning, a symbol of everything they had overcome and their hopes for the future. That night was a milestone in Steve's journey. He knew that despite the challenges he would still face, he had people by his side who loved and supported him unconditionally. And that made all the difference. Despite the victory in court and the shared joy with Emily and Lucas, the challenges in Steve's business were far from over. The company, weakened by the legal battle and false accusations, was on the brink of collapse. Steve knew he needed to act quickly to save what he had built, but each day seemed to bring new obstacles. He spent hours in the office reviewing contracts, seeking investors, and trying to renegotiate debts. The pressure was immense, and there were nights when he could hardly sleep. Emily saw the tension mounting in Steve and tried to offer support, but he was so consumed by work that he began to drift away from her and Lucas. One night, while Steve was buried in paperwork, Emily entered the office with a worried expression. "Steve, you need to rest. You're killing yourself with this work." Steve looked up, his face tired and drawn. "I can't stop now, Emily. If I don't save this company, we lose everything." Emily approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We won't lose everything. We have each other, we have Lucas. That's what matters." Steve sighed, feeling a crushing weight on his chest. "I know, but I feel like I'm failing again. Like everything I touch is crumbling." Emily held Steve's face, forcing him to look at her. "You're not failing. You're fighting, and that's what matters. But you need to take care of yourself, Steve. We need you." At that moment, Lucas burst into the room, tears in his eyes. "Steve, what's happening? Are you okay?" Steve felt his heart break at seeing the concern on Lucas's face. He knelt down and hugged the boy. "I'm okay, Lucas. I'm just trying to sort out some problems." But the problems were piling up. The next day, Steve received a devastating phone call. One of the company's major investors had decided to withdraw their support, leaving the company on the brink of bankruptcy. Steve felt like the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. He returned home in silence, unable to find words to explain what was happening. Emily noticed the immediate change in his behavior and tried to comfort him, but Steve withdrew, lost in his own thoughts. That night, Steve sat alone on the porch, looking up at the starry sky. He felt a deep pain and an overwhelming sense of failure. Everything he had fought for was falling apart, and he didn't know how to fix it. Suddenly, Steve heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of his house. He got up and went to the door, feeling a knot in his stomach. When he opened the door, he saw Amanda, his ex-wife, standing there with a determined look. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" Steve asked, his voice filled with exhaustion and surprise. Amanda entered the house without being invited, her expression serious. "I came to talk about the company. I know things are bad and that you're on the verge of collapse." Steve felt anger rising inside him. "After everything you've done, you think you can just show up here and offer help? I don't need you." Amanda took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "I know I hurt you, Steve, but the truth is I still care. And I don't want to see you lose everything you've worked for." Steve laughed bitterly, the pain evident in his voice. "You think you can fix everything with words? I lost investors, I'm about to lose my company. And you only brought me pain." Amanda took a step forward, her eyes full of determination. "Let me help, Steve. I know I can do something. We can work together to save the company." Steve looked at her, his heart torn between anger and hopelessness. He knew he was at a critical point and any help could be crucial. But trusting Amanda again felt like a huge risk. "I don't know if I can do this," he said, his voice breaking. Amanda placed her hand on his shoulder, her expression sincere. "We don't have much time, Steve. Please let me help." Steve closed his eyes, feeling the tears burning. He was desperate, exhausted, and felt like he had no more options. With a slow nod, he finally relented. "All right, Amanda. Let's give it a try." Amanda's presence brought a palpable tension into the house. Emily and Lucas felt the weight of the situation, but Steve was determined to try anything to save the company. Amanda began spending her days at the company, working alongside Steve to find solutions. It was a dynamic fraught with distrust and a history of unresolved hurt. Emily tried to be understanding, but Amanda's constant presence made her uncomfortable. One evening, while preparing dinner, she finally opened up to Steve. "Steve, I understand that you need to save the company, but Amanda being here, it's affecting us. Lucas is confused and I feel insecure." Steve stopped shuffling through the documents and looked at Emily, the pain evident in his eyes. "Emily, I know this is hard. Feel it too. But I'm desperate. If the company fails, everything I've worked for goes down the drain. I have to try." Emily took a deep breath, holding back tears. "I love you, Steve, and I want to support you, but I can't shake the feeling that we're losing something precious. Our peace, our security." Steve drew closer, embracing Emily tightly. "I love you more than anything, Emily, and I'm doing this for us, for Lucas, for our family." Despite Steve's words, the tension only escalated. At work, he and Amanda faced constant challenges. Investors were hesitant to return, and the team was demotivated. Steve felt the weight of every decision, every move, and the stress began to affect his health. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting, Steve and Amanda returned to the office. Amanda, noticing Steve's exhausted state, tried to start a conversation. "Steve, we managed to resolve the issue with the suppliers, but we need more capital. I was thinking of selling some properties to raise funds." Steve shook his head, his expression grim. "Amanda, I don't know how much more I can do. I'm on the brink of collapse. This pressure, it's killing me." Amanda looked at him, genuinely concerned. "I know I messed up, Steve, but I'm trying to make things right. We can overcome this together as a team." Steve felt a wave of frustration. "As a team? After everything that's happened? It's hard to trust you, Amanda. Every time I look at you, I'm reminded of what I've lost." Amanda fell silent, Steve's words echoing painfully. "I understand, but I'm here now trying to help. I just hope that eventually you can forgive me." Meanwhile at home, Lucas began to feel the impact of the situation. He sensed the tension between Steve and Emily, and Amanda's presence only heightened his confusion. One night, he went to Steve's room, his eyes filled with tears. "Steve, why is Amanda here? Don't you like us anymore?" Steve felt his heart break at seeing Lucas's distress. He knelt down and hugged the boy tightly. "Lucas, I love you more than anything. I'm trying to save the company so we can have a better life. Amanda is here to help with that." Lucas sobbed, clinging to Steve. "I just want everything to go back to normal. I want us to be happy again." Steve held Lucas's face, tears streaming down his own. "And we will be, Lucas. Promise. We just have to weather this storm first." Steve's words were true, but he knew the road ahead was still full of challenges. Collaborating with Amanda was far from easy, and the impact on his relationship with Emily and Lucas was becoming more evident with each passing day. Weeks passed in a whirlwind of stress and uncertainties. Steve, torn between saving his company and keeping his family together, felt increasingly pressured. Nights were sleepless and days were long and exhausting. Amanda, despite her efforts to help, often served as a constant reminder of his past failures and betrayals. One night, after another marathon of meetings and tough decisions, Steve returned home to find Emily sitting at the kitchen table, the dim lights casting shadows on her tired face. "We need to talk, Steve," she said, her voice calm yet firm. Steve sat across from her, feeling the weight of the impending conversation. "I know, Emily. Things are tough, and I'm sorry for all of this." Emily took a deep breath, holding his hands. "I see how hard you're fighting, and I admire your determination. But I also see how much this is tearing us apart. Lucas is suffering, I'm suffering, and you're slowly killing yourself." Steve closed his eyes, feeling tears welling up. "I don't know what to do. Every decision feels like the last. And every failure. It's like everything is crumbling." Emily squeezed his hands, her eyes full of love and concern. "Steve, we love you and we're with you, but we need you. Not just as the savior of the company, but as the man we love. Please don't lose yourself in this process." Emily's words struck deep, revealing the painful truth that Steve had been trying to ignore. He was drifting away from the people who mattered most, losing himself in the battle to save something that, in the end, might not be worth the cost. The next day, Steve made a difficult decision. He gathered his team, including Amanda, and announced that he would sell part of the company to ensure its survival. It was a drastic measure but necessary. Steve knew he needed to protect what remained of his business while prioritizing his health and his family. The reaction was mixed. Amanda supported the decision, seeing it as a chance for redemption and reconstruction. But the team was divided, some feeling it was a betrayal of the company's principles, while others saw it as a last hope. As negotiations began, Steve devoted more time to spending with Emily and Lucas. They took walks together, had unhurried dinners, and talked at length about their fears and hopes. Steve felt their connection strengthening, but the shadow of the business crisis still loomed over them. One afternoon, when things seemed to be improving, Steve received an urgent call from Paul. "Steve, we have a problem. One of the investors is trying to withdraw the offer at the last minute." Steve felt a chill run down his spine. This can't be happening. Not now. Paul, on the other end of the line, was equally concerned. "We need an immediate meeting to resolve this. If we lose this investor, the sale won't go through." Steve looked at Emily, who was by his side, and saw the worry in her eyes. "I need to go," he said, his voice trembling. "But I promise I'll come back and sort this out." Emily held his face, her eyes filled with love and support. "We're with you, Steve. Go and do what needs to be done. We love you." Steve left home, feeling the weight of yet another crisis on his shoulders. On the way to the meeting, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The company, his family, his fears and hopes. Everything seemed to intertwine in a knot that was almost impossible to untangle. The meeting was tense. The investor, swayed by rumors and insecurities, was on the verge of backing out. Steve and Paul did everything they could to convince him to stay, using arguments, data, and above all the passion Steve had for the company and the future it could still build. In the end, the investor relented. The sale was confirmed, but Steve felt like a part of him had been broken in the process. He returned home, exhausted and emotionally drained, but found Emily and Lucas waiting for him, their faces illuminated by unconditional love. They embraced, and Steve felt the tears finally streaming down, washing away the accumulated pain and suffering. He knew the battle was far from over, but in that moment, surrounded by those he loved, he found the strength to carry on. After the exhausting battle to save the company, Steve felt that he could finally breathe a little easier. The sale of part of the company brought the necessary stability, and now he could focus on rebuilding what had been broken. But above all, he knew he needed to take care of his family and his relationship with Emily and Lucas. Steve began to dedicate more time to Emily and Lucas, cherishing every moment together. He wanted to make up for lost time and strengthen the bonds that had almost been destroyed by pressure and stress. One afternoon, while they were at the park, Steve and Lucas were playing ball while Emily watched them, a smile of contentment on her face. Lucas ran happily, his laughter filling the air with a lightness that Steve hadn't felt in a long time. "Steve, are you really happy now?" Emily asked as they watched Lucas play. Steve looked at Emily, his eyes reflecting the depth of his feelings. "Yes, Emily. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on the right path. And that's because of you." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "We feel the same way, Steve. We're finally finding the peace we've been searching for." But life had more challenges in store for Steve. A few days later, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from the hospital, informing him that his mother, Sarah, had been admitted again. The news hit him like a punch to the stomach, bringing back a wave of fear and worry. Steve rushed to the hospital with Emily by his side, his heart heavy with uncertainty. Upon arrival, he found Sarah lying in bed, her frail figure breathing heavily. He held her hand, feeling the urgency of the moment. "Mom, I'm here," Steve said, his voice breaking. Sarah opened her eyes, a weak but loving smile appearing on her face. "Steve, I'm so glad you're here." Emily and Lucas approached, and Sarah looked at them with tenderness. "You are the family Steve always needed. Thank you for being by his side." Sarah's words deeply touched Steve and Emily. "We are a family, Sarah, and we will get through this together," Emily said, holding Sarah's other hand. In the days that followed, Steve split his time between the hospital, the company, and his family. It was an exhausting routine, but he was determined to be there for everyone he loved. One night, while sitting by his mother's bedside, Steve felt a moment of profound connection. "Mom, I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right for you, for Emily, for Lucas. I want you to know how much I love you and how much you mean to me." Sarah squeezed Steve's hand, her tears mingling with his. "I always knew you had a good heart, Steve, and seeing you now with your family gives me peace. I love you, my son. I always have." Those moments of vulnerability and love were a turning point for Steve. He knew that, regardless of what the future held, he was surrounded by people who loved and supported him unconditionally. And that gave him the strength to keep fighting. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Steve. He juggled between the hospital, where his mother was admitted, and the office where he tried to keep the company running. Emily and Lucas were always by his side, offering unwavering support and love. One afternoon, while Steve was at the hospital, the doctor entered Sarah's room with a serious expression. "Mr. Miller, we need to talk about your mother's condition." Steve felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at Sarah, who weakly smiled, trying to convey a calmness she didn't feel. "I'll be okay, my son," she whispered, squeezing his hand. In the doctor's office, Steve was devastated to learn that Sarah's condition was critical, and she needed intensive care. "We're doing everything we can, but the situation is delicate," the doctor explained. Leaving the office, Steve felt crushed. Upon finding Emily and Lucas in the waiting room, he couldn't hold back his tears. "I don't know what to do," he confessed, his voice choked with pain. Emily embraced Steve, her own tears falling. "We'll get through this together, Steve. We're here for you." Lucas, sensing the gravity of the situation, held Steve's hand. "We're a family, Steve, and we'll take care of Grandma." Those simple words from Lucas gave Steve newfound strength. He knew he needed to be strong, not just for his mother, but for Emily and Lucas too. Amidst this emotional storm, Steve received an urgent phone call from the office. The company was facing an unexpected financial crisis, and he needed to make quick decisions to avoid a total collapse. Feeling torn between his responsibilities, Steve asked Paul to handle operations while he dealt with the personal situation. However, the pressure became overwhelming. One night, after spending the day at the hospital and the early evening at the office, Steve collapsed at home, exhausted and emotionally drained. Emily found him sitting on the porch, his head in his hands, and her heart broke to see him like that. "Steve, you need to rest. You can't keep pushing yourself like this," Emily said, her voice full of concern. Steve looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "I feel like I'm failing everyone, Emily. My mother, the company, you, and Lucas. I don't know what to do anymore." Emily knelt beside him, holding his hands. "You're not failing, Steve. You're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. We're here for you. We'll get through this together." Lucas, overhearing the conversation, approached and hugged Steve tightly. "I love you, Steve, and I know you're doing your best. Let's be strong together." Emily and Lucas' words brought unexpected comfort to Steve. He realized that, despite the adversities, he had something incredibly valuable: the love and support of his family. That gave him the strength to keep fighting. A few days later, while Steve was at the hospital with Sarah, Emily arrived with hopeful news. "Steve, I received a call from an investor interested in helping the company. He heard about your situation and wants to meet with you." Steve felt a wave of relief mixed with skepticism. Could it be that we're finally catching a break? Emily smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "I think so. Let's seize this opportunity." The meeting with the investor was scheduled for the next day. Steve, though exhausted, felt a renewed energy as he prepared for the encounter. He knew this was a crucial opportunity to save the company and secure a stable future for his family. During the meeting, Steve presented his rebuilding plans with passion and determination. Impressed by Steve's resilience and vision, the investor agreed to provide the necessary capital to revitalize the company. When Steve returned home and shared the news with Emily and Lucas, they hugged him with joy. "We did it, Steve. Finally, some good news," Emily said, smiling through tears of relief. Steve felt immense gratitude for his family's unwavering support. He knew there were still many challenges ahead, but with Emily and Lucas by his side, he felt prepared to face them. The following months were a period of intense work and recovery for Steve, Emily, and Lucas. With the support of the new investor, the company began to bounce back. Steve was determined to do things differently this time, prioritizing not only financial success but also the well-being of the employees and the sustainability of the business. At home, the family dynamic flourished. Emily and Steve grew closer than ever, and Lucas, feeling secure and loved, showed signs of growth and confidence. They began to share meals, play, and tell stories, strengthening the bonds that united them. Despite the progress, Sarah was still hospitalized. Steve continued to divide his time between the hospital and work, always with Emily and Lucas by his side. One night, while they were all gathered around Sarah's bed, something unexpected happened. "Mom, I wanted you to know that the company is recovering," Steve said, holding her hand. "But more than that, I wanted you to see how united we are now, as a true family." Sarah, with a weak smile, looked at Steve, Emily, and Lucas. "I'm so proud of you, Steve. You found what truly matters in life. And that gives me peace." A few days later, Sarah began to show signs of deterioration. Steve, alongside Emily and Lucas, felt the weight of the impending goodbye. He knew the moment was approaching, and the fear of losing his mother was overwhelming. That night, as he held Sarah's hand, Steve began to cry. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for all the times I disappointed you." Sarah squeezed Steve's hand with the little strength she had left. "You never disappointed me, my son. I'm so happy you found your way, and that you're surrounded by love. That's all a mother could wish for." Emily and Lucas drew closer, forming a circle of love and support around Sarah. "We'll always remember you, Grandma," Lucas said, his voice soft but full of emotion. Sarah looked at them all, her eyes shining with unconditional love. "Remember to take care of each other. And to be happy." With these words, Sarah closed her eyes, her body relaxing as she bid farewell to this world. Steve, Emily, and Lucas cried together, feeling the depth of the loss, but also the gratitude for the time shared and the lessons learned. After the funeral, Steve felt a sense of renewal. He knew his mother was at peace, and that gave him strength to move forward. With Emily and Lucas by his side, he decided it was time to look to the future with hope and determination. The company, now stable, began to thrive under Steve's new leadership. He implemented changes that reflected his renewed values, focusing on ethical practices and employee well-being. The business grew, but this time, Steve made sure that his personal life was not sacrificed for professional success. On a sunny day, Steve, Emily, and Lucas were at the park laughing and playing. It was a moment of pure joy and serenity. Steve looked at Emily, his heart full of love and gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you guys," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You've given me a second chance to be happy, to be the man I always wanted to be." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with love. "We're a family, Steve, and we'll face everything together always." Lucas ran to them, hugging them tightly. "Love you guys," he said, his voice full of innocence and joy. Steve looked up at the sky, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that, regardless of future challenges, he had found his true purpose, to love and be loved. And that was all that mattered.